Welcome to our debate about European policy. And please, let's start with a call for the EU President, start with an apology. Why? Because of the many European colonial crimes and during the times of imperialism, but until recently, in which Europe has committed in Asia, Africa, against Arab states, in Eastern Europe, and I think it's time to start with an apology, especially from the European president. We had some progress on this debate recently with the French president, the Dutch prime minister. You know, there was progress in all Europe to somehow be aware about these colonial crimes and apologies and also compensate. But I think it's time, in the name of all Europeans, as a political union, which we are, to start with an apology. It's important to clean the past, to get ready, to understand it better, and to be more aware in order to be ready for a common future based on bilateral free trade agreements, based on OECD membership, based on equality and mutual agreed standards. This is very important, and we have to reach that in order to counter the effect of the corona crisis, to be ready for the second wave of globalization, and also to have a fairer and better world. I think it's important to discuss about the past crimes, of which there were really so many, and we have to focus, in my view, in this presentation I will focus on the phases the period between 1870, when basically I call it the steam-powered industrialized colonialism started. I will, the age of exploration and the 400 years before, I will not focus on that. I think also that was a different time frame and a different level of awareness, of standards, of values. But in 1870, we can speak about modernity and about, people were relatively aware about what was good and what was wrong. And we can really say that this way of imperial conquest, which started after German and Italian unification, which started basically with America becoming a global superpower, and, with all these conquests and scramble for Africa, the great game in Asia. And this is the phase we really have to analyze in this moment. And we have to find the right way to commemorate our crimes in order to be ready for a common future. And it all starts with Mr. Michel and Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, best both, to start with an apology to the countries where so many crimes have been committed. I'm very much in favor of having this now, because we have a lot of debates about boycotts. You hear the word boycotts. Boycotts meaning that we don't work with the other countries, we don't trade with them, we impose our imperialist agenda from green or from climate thinking about these countries with the way to exclude them from prosperity and continue to have them poor. And that is, of course, very terrible policy of some of the extreme left and extreme right. But some in the center are also thinking like this. If they are not perfect, we don't conclude a FTA with Cambodia or with Mercosur or with ASEAN if they don't 100% exactly as we want them, in human rights and in palm oil and in the Amazonas. We will boycott and starve you to death. We will exclude you from European prosperity opportunity because you are not as we want you. And that's, of course, the way of thinking, that's really the way colonialists work. That's really the way imperialists work. They only accept themselves as the only standards, and that's the only way to be. And then everybody else will be forced by force. And of course, the means are different. We don't send cannon boats these days. So often anymore, at least, But, we exclude them from our level of prosperity, and then people starve in America, in Asia, in Africa. And that's, of course, equally wrong, So we really have to come to a new understanding here. And where's the target? I have made it very clear. I have selected the most important free trade agreements, which we should have concluded already 20 years ago, but we didn't do it. This is from Australia, New Zealand, Mercosur, ASEAN, Indonesia, USA, African Union, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and Uzbekistan, and also India. And there are some other smaller ones, obviously, to complete the customs union in Europe, and all these important issues. Yeah, but to be very clear, we should have done that already. A long time ago, we should have done that, and we are very wrong to somehow think of ourselves as so great and so much in the truth that only the ones who absolutely work according to our standards of animal safety and other things, we only then they are allowed to trade with us, because these are mutually agreed free trade agreements. So let's sum up where we are, and what we did to the world. Yeah, I have made for the 9 major colonial powers of Europe just one of the most heinous crimes. Yeah, because there were so many, you cannot put it in one presentation. It's simply too much. Yeah, but here comes for the UK. The atrocities committed in the Boer War in South Africa. I mean, this is one of the worst examples where even the one colonial power attacks the other colonial power. And basically the British attacking the Dutch, all claiming some moral superiority, everybody interested in gold and diamonds, and a lot of victims, or especially on the African side. So that's really, and that's quite recent, actually, in 1900. Same time, the Germans in Namibia, the Kaiser's Holocaust. Please read this book. It's quite a terrible crime what has been done, and still the struggle for compensation is still out there. So we come to the Spanish. Obviously, I focused in this one on the African crimes in Africa. Here, a major colonial war under industrialized position. I choose the date, the Rif War, basically that's in Morocco, when the Spanish had a big defeat, actually, on the 22nd of July. But ultimately, okay, these brave warriors from the Tuareg, and they could win one battle, but against the industrialized, the steam powers, the First World War capacity, European industrialized nation, and together with France, they were then defeating, of course, and then winning in Morocco, and that was, of course, a terrible crime, what was happening there. Then we have the French, obviously, one of the main colonial powers. And I have chosen the date when they defeated the Wasulu West African Empire, a domestic African empire. No, the French, of course, with imperial industrial power, defeated them. Now the French claim to be the brick protectors of West Africa. Good, but on mutual agreement, and not French kind of separatism in Europe, but this has to be Europeanized. We have to help and support in form of a free trade agreement, a currency peg, and the French have anyhow started already to apologize, but this all needs to be Europeanized, the commemoration and the partnership. And then the Italians, and their crimes in Libya. This was, of course, a terrible attack on Libya, unprecedented. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Italians wanted to have something like, because the French took Tunisia, and then started 30 years of terrible colonial exploitative wars. Yeah? And then we have Portugal and their crimes in Angola and in Mozambique. Yeah? Terrible, and lasting until the 60s, 70s. Yeah? Really very terrible. Then the Dutch and their crimes in Indonesia, and the Belgians and their crimes in Congo. And of course, I want to have a central commemoration day, a EU-African Day. That's the 1st of March, the first time the Ethiopians have defeated the Italians in the Battle of Adwa. This is all really terrible, what we did. You could start crying when you think it, yeah? From all of the 9 colonial powers. I have put Italy twice here, but there's also, of course, I put also the UK with its role. It's India, terrible. I have also included the French a second time in Algeria, and that's also the idea behind the 17th of October, because that was when they have actually made a lot of atrocities in Paris to clamp down on a pro-independence demonstration, and they killed the people with a police action in Paris. Yeah? Quite a terrible crime. I have also included, the colonial crimes of the Turks in Europe. That's, of course, a major colonial activity. For sure, the Turks, in the form of the Ottoman Empire, were a colonial power. I've included also, and a reminder about the Austrians in Bosnia, obviously a colonial power. Also about the Serbs in Kosovo and Macedonia, obviously a colonial power. And again, Gandhi Day on the 2nd of October. That means all the crimes and the exploitation the British did in so-called British India, and they have the whole of South India, South Asia basically controlled and exploited for so long, with many, many massacres during separation, before separation. Amritsar is the big topic in that, and the big name in that one. And of course, I include here, but I will also do a separate presentation about all the Second World War crimes and the Holocaust Memorial Days. But I have specifically done this general plan East and the Holocaust in Ukraine, because that was really a very typical colonial conquest. Yeah? The idea was to remove the population, kill many of them, and then bring German settlers. Yeah? And that's really the colonial in its term. Yeah? And so this must be included as well as one of the most terrible crimes. Yeah? So summing up, all Europeans, the Eastern Europeans, from the Serbs, also the Turks, also the Austrians, but definitely all Western Europeans, from the Germans to the Dutch, the French, the Italians, the Spanish, Dutch and Belgians, all have a lot of historic ballast to carry in the generation of their grandfathers and great-grandfathers. Obviously, it's a long time ago. It's not a personal kind of guilt. Let's get this right, but it's a collective responsibility for what happened in the European recent past. It's just 150 years ago, and it's lasted actually. The last really colonial liberation war was the liberation war of Kosovo and of Montenegro from Serbia in the year 1990, because they were obviously colonized by Serbia. And then you see from 1870 to 2000, basically, that is 130 years of European colonial past. We have started to excuse and apologize on some, but there is much to be done in order to be ready for a better future based on mutually agreed political and trade terms. And so it's time for an apology. I've talked shortly through this West African imperialism of the French, while Macron has really started to discuss a lot about it. That's very welcome. We need to Europeanize this debate, and it needs a European side apology in order to be ready for a real partnership with our friends from the African Union, especially the West African Economic Union, which is the closest we have. And we have also this currency link with them, and that needs to be kept, and that needs to be Europeanized. Let's not forget the Portuguese, and they were the first in the age of exploration, but they were also the last one to leave. You know, this is quite recently when they have the Angolans and the Mozambique people could have independence, and we should really include them very much in the forefront of the debate. The whole crisis, the whole terror regime which the King Leopold built up in Congo is now well researched. Let's not forget the Berlin Conference, this famous division of Africa, and then commemorate this every year, how we behaved and what we did and how terrible it was continuing, you know. It was really on and on and on, you know, and the Belgians didn't really leave Congo alone. Yeah? There was this terrible murder of the opposition leader, and there was continuous, and just I think it was not the Syrian war, I looked it up, but the Congo internal war in the 2000s, the biggest war in the 21st century. And, you know, these are all very terrible, historically connected to Europe and to European colonialism. And we want to have a better future with the Africans. Yeah, let's talk about our past crimes first, yeah, and make it clear that we have also done a lot of wrong. This is a typical way to do it. It led to the First World War. It was on the 29th of September 1911 when this newly formed Italy thought it's cool to attack, to be the great Roman Empire again and attack the southern side of the Adriatic, and it was a complete disaster. Obviously, they didn't manage very well, and they led to a lot of devastation and wars. Yeah, and disaster, 30 years of colonial crimes of Italy in Libya. And then obviously, you know, a shorter period in a way because the Germans came late to imperialism and colonialism, but they did it with this cruelty, expert cruelty. On the 2nd of October 1904, the Namibians chose the 29th of May actually as commemoration day. So I followed that idea of the Namibian NGOs who are working on that. But it was really very terrible. Of course, they had later stopped it, but nevertheless, yeah. Where's the apology? Where is the that has happened actually? Where's the compensation? That's still to be negotiated. Yeah? I mean, that's now in 2020. So also the British, they always say they were the softest and best form of empire. I mean, ask the Boer and the Dutch and ask the people who in India. I really doubt that, you know, it was also very terrible. Of course, they are now left, so we should not apologize for them. But, you know, let's take it all conclusively. Nobody was a great and nice empire, neither the Japanese, the Russians, or the Americans, which I have not included in this presentation. All of them have massive criminal activity, even under their books. You know, it was criminal activity at that time, yeah. It was crimes at that time according to the criminal codes of that countries, yeah. You know, that is not that in the benefit of hindsight. Some years ago, we can say, oh, that was not really good, and the poor people, they didn't know. No, much of this was really well-known facts and criminal activity at the time they committed it, justified by war, conquest, yeah, or greed. And here we come, this was actually in 21 after the First World War. And then the Spanish-French wars against the people of Morocco. Very terrible. Huh? So then comes this Algerian war. Of course, there are so many atrocities you can never stop to talk about it. Yeah? But in 61, on the 17th of October, the Paris massacre. I mean, this is really very bad. In 61, we are not talking about, 1861, but we are talking about 1961. Here, of course, the celebration, we should now build the Southern Partnership. Yeah? We have the Southern Neighborhood, we have the Union for the Mediterranean. It's time for a Southern Partnership of the EU with Africa, with the Mediterranean Union. But what we need to do to clear the past, we need to understand, we need to tell our population what went wrong and that we are sorry. You know, there must be a constant kind of clarity in the apology. Otherwise, it's a bit not serious. For example, we still have no Indonesian EU free trade agreement because of palm oil. Yeah? I mean, how must it feel when you are a Dutch, when you are an Indonesian representative, knowing the history of colonialism of the Dutch and the crimes committed during the Dutch-Indonesian War? I'm not talking about, you know, we can always talk, I think it's not the right debate about 1550, 1600, you know, this was, you know, a long time ago, and how you really, this was a struggle of nations, you can say, whatever, yeah. But when I'm talking about the year 1946, yeah, you know, and they left actually the Dutch on the 27th of December 47, yeah. It's, you know, they were already defeated in the World War II. They were liberated by the Americans and the British. Yeah. The first thing the Dutch did is desperately trying to suppress the Indonesians, yeah, who were just escaping the Japanese colonialism. And with all brutality, the Dutch came back and did all these colonial crimes against the Indonesians. I mean, and at that time, they knew already everything, like Nuremberg, the Holocaust, yeah, all these terrible things that happened by the Nazis against the Dutch. No, it didn't stop them to go back to Indonesia and bomb them into submission, trying at least. Yeah, it didn't work basically because the Americans simply, in the beginning, didn't were really surprised by these atrocities. But Truman later didn't support anything of this Dutch and French neo-colonialism trying to take back Southeast Asia. And of course, this one was a complete failure. And on the 27th, the Dutch actually left in 47. Let's talk obviously also always about the terrible crime of the Holocaust. But let's not forget, it was not only the Holocaust, but it was also very much meant to destroy the Ukrainian population, drive them from Ukraine, and settle German farmers in the territory of Ukraine. You know, this is what the Generalplan Ost was about. If you don't believe it, read the book of Timothy Snyder, Bloodlands, or other very good publications on this one. And this was a classical colonial conquest for land, remove the people, destroy them or drive them away, and do these terrible crimes. Yeah? So we should be very much aware about this in our policy towards Ukraine. And this was classical colonialism in the most extreme form. Here we come to Gandhi. We have the 2nd of October, Global Day for Non-Violence. He was, of course, a spectacular hero. But, you know, he was, and I can connect it a little bit with this current war we have in Azerbaijan and Armenia, because it was the Global Day of Non-Violence. I will also make a separate slide about the British massacre of Amritsar when I have time for that. But it is really very terrible what they have done with the Bengal famine, with the starvation. And, you know, a lot of things happened wrongly in India. It was not the great paradise, the fantastic British bringing civilization to India. A lot of exploitation, a lot of imperial colonial crimes. And that's why the Gandhi could raise the whole population in protest. But it's also, of course, the Soviet Union was a terrible colonial regime, and obviously before the Russian Empire, from the Caucasus to the far east in Asia, so many colonial conquests. I have focused on the liberation struggle of the Georgians in '89 and of the Baltics. Yeah? They were the first one to bring down the Soviet Union, especially because they felt colonialized. Yeah? It was their freedom struggle. The Baltics were free in the interwar years. Yeah? And the Georgians wanted to be free all the time. They never choose to be in the Soviet Union. Yeah? And of course, this was terrible. And we can be very happy that in '91 the Soviet Union colonial empire broke down. So then was Bosnian annexation crisis 1908. This is classical Austrian colonialism. When asked the Bosnians if they wanted to be in the Austrian Empire, I don't think so. The Muslims certainly wanted to be in a Muslim state, and the Serbs wanted to be in Serbia. So that's the story here. The Austrians said, no, we will administer you. Thank you very much, without any consent. So, and it led to a big disaster later. Serbian colonialism, the same, you know. And there was people living in Macedonia and in Kosovo which really didn't want to be governed, administered, or killed, or ethnically cleansed by the Serbs. Yeah? The Serbs said, this is our traditional land, please people, leave, yeah, or we kill you. And this was happened, you know. They didn't want the Bulgarians, they didn't want the Albanians, they didn't want the Turks. And there were a lot of them living in these two vilayets, Kosovo, Macedonia, three of the vilayets, in the region the Serbs conquered, while the Bulgarians were winning the war against the Turks. Obviously, the Turks were also colonial power. It's, you know, it's so many uprisings against the Ottoman power in the European continent between whatever, there's a whole list, you know, Linden uprising, Preprashne, Krastoven, Rodopnia mountains, the Christian people of the Balkans, and later also the Muslim people, and like the Albanians, they didn't really want to live anymore under the Sultan. It was a colonial regime. What to do? I say it very clearly. We need the Union of Freedom, that's the EU and NATO, and that's free nations choosing their alliances, but that creates stability, that creates prosperity. So Austria, Kosovo, Bosnia, Serbia join NATO, and so will be united, secure in NATO. That's the answer to all the colonial and recent crises of the Austrian, Turkish, and Balkan provenance. That I have said already. So how to really conclude then? You know, all the countries which are coming out of the self-determination struggle of the Balkans, but everywhere else, be in the United Nations. Can anybody understand why Kosovo is not in the United Nations after having been liberated from colonial occupation by the Serbs? Obviously, it is necessary. Then we need also to open the OECD and to transform it more into the union of market democracies. Because in the UN, obviously, we have an organization where everybody should be member. Also the dictatorships, also Syria, also the communist Chinese, also the authoritarian Russians. You know, we need one organization where all the world tries to keep the common standards, but not in the Union for Market Democracy, not in the OECD. That should be the main body to promote market democracy. That means that standards of democracy must be there. So we don't need also, we have to discuss with our friends from Saudi Arabia, obviously, and with others, you know. The G7, G20, that should be both attached to the OECD. G7, G8, I have made a separate presentation about that one, should be like the governing body of the OECD. G20 like the main General Assembly, biannual, and then all the members obviously on a 2-yearly summit or something like this. Yeah? That should be the three-level governance of the OECD, and all the countries who join should be market economies and democracies. This is very important. And we can make progress, actually. There's a lot of negative blah blah out there, the end of democracy, and so it's all absolute nonsense. Yeah? Look at the two pictures. I think it's very fascinating. 2010, the Arab Summit, and then the EU Summit 2019 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and you see that a lot of the guys who were dictators and authoritarian ruffians, they are no longer in power in the Arab world, yeah? And so on and so on, and you see the progress. And what I call here, enlarge the OECD, include, relocate them to Istanbul, and ensure that all the Arab countries are members of the OECD, to have basically the political transition supported by OECD and the market democracy transition organized and supported by the OECD. And so when it comes to the Global Day for Democracy, I have made the chart, I put the chart here, which is the global ranking for democracy. You see exactly where are the problems. Yeah? In the communist China, in the authoritarian Russia, you see it in some of the Arab Islamist states and in the center of Africa. And here very much the colonial and colonialized parts. This is very much the responsibility of the Europeans. We have to really work hard and to support market democracy in Africa. You see socialist Cuba and Venezuela, the outlier in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, you see the real problems in China and in Russia, which are promoting a different agenda. How to counter that? Obviously, we had in 2000 the Millennium Development Goals. We have promised to pay 1% of the rich world's GDP for international development. Look, we are not there. We are at 0.3. And this is absolutely wrong. We need to increase, after Corona now, our spending on international development to really help the OECD and the OECD and the UN to promote the democratization and the market economy of the world, especially the Austrians, because I'm from Austria, I'm very much focused on that one. You know, we are underspending completely and being frugal on the EU level. Unacceptable. You know, we need to spend on defense, we need to spend on development, we need to spend on global governance, and we need to spend a lot on it. Yeah? It's expensive. But war and failure is much more expensive. Yeah? Let's not forget, we talked a lot about peace even before the World War I. In 1907, at the second Den Haag Peace Conference in 1907, we had such a massive progress on talking about peace, but we didn't build the institutions. We were just talking while preparing for war. And let's not forget, while doing agro-protectionism, not creating the global institutions for economic justice, governance, like the IMF, like the World Bank, like all these global institutions like World Trade Organization. No, every colonial empire did its own colonial tariff policies, trying to exclude all other colonial empires, and built its own internal trading system, and the Germans obviously did it as well. Yeah? And it was this imperial German tariffs of 1902 which then started a big tariff war and a lot of realignment of the Russians, basically being driven from the German market, unfairly excluded from the most important export market, and in the hands of the British. And the consequences are very much well known, yeah. And that was, of course, a terrible mistake. Yeah? And we have made many terrible mistakes in the past. Let's not forget how even after the Second World War and all these terrible things, and the first effort to create a WTO, a World Trade Organization, failed. The International Trade Organization failed of 1915. Yeah, it was not all perfect. Yeah, obviously we managed to create the GATT as a first step. Yeah, that was very good, and we can be very happy about it. Yeah. And then we managed, after the victory in the Cold War, we managed to create the WTO and to transform the GATT to the next level in Marrakesh. And that was very good. Look at the success. Now the world has 86 trillion GDP output. I mean, at the 1990, it has 22 trillions to 86. Yeah, I mean, this is what is possible. Yeah? Under free market democracies. Yeah, and this is an amazing success. But, of course, in 2008, it got a little bit more difficult, after 20 years, and, the prices were rising, and populism protection was on the rise. The fortress, yeah, agriculture subsidies of the EU, yeah, agriculture subsidies of the US, yeah, textile subsidies, and so on. And in Doha, we really failed the world. Yeah? We, the rich world, failed the world, the global poor, and ultimately ourselves, because our specific agriculture textile lobbies, yeah, and the protectionist populist politicians, yeah, and they completely failed the world on the 27th of July. And it's no coincidence that later the financial crisis came, because, the global financial markets probably lost all confidence that there is a responsible kind of global governance happening. And that's a real kind of eternal shame. This should be declared a day of shame in European trade policy. Anyhow, the same day is then we start all this kind of climate, Amazonas, and my best example is the palm oil populism. What is that, We decide somehow that Nutella is bad and it kills the rainforest. Some NGOs decided. And then, we get so unscientifically, so kind of irrational that what should they do, the Indonesians and the Malaysians, which are producing this stuff, yeah? It's totally wrong. And should they send us cannon boats? Obviously, they put us to the WTO, and, we make fools out of ourselves. Yeah? With such policy, yeah? If we don't want to buy them, nobody is forcing Nutella down your throat, yeah? Don't eat it, yeah? But don't allow them to sell it, yeah? I mean, if you don't want to eat palm oil, don't eat it. When this is your consumer preference, nobody is forcing anything you to eat, yeah? But don't use state power, because that's what it is. Don't use the customs power with people with police, yeah, with guns in their hand, to block the people from Indonesia to do that and to sell it to the European consumer. I mean, how outrageous is such a policy? It's immoral, irresponsible, irrational, protectionist, populism, and it's basically very deeply immoral. So when we come to reducing poverty, which I think everybody wants, yeah, then we have to trade with each other. I mean, we cannot pay all the South Americans with subsidies, The way for prosperity is economic development, yeah. This means that we have to trade with each other. To not allow people to trade, yeah, because that is totally wrong. They have things, we have actually more things, yeah. So it's them who make also concession, because we produce the cars and the computers and the technology. So anyhow, they have now also agreed to open and to end the socialist protectionism. Also understanding that opening is it's good for both. Yeah? And we have many examples in the world now where this really works. Yeah? So they have agreed, we have agreed mutually, after 25 years of discussion, to have a free trade agreement. And then come these people, the richest young people, beautiful, Mr. Kurz, Rutte, Köstinger, Macron, and these people who are now in their 30s, 40s in power, and they were growing up in the luxury and beautiful of power and political splendor and their positions, and the only thing they can do, Austria clearly against Mercosur. I mean, this is racist. This is not just protectionist. Yeah? Austria are against Brazil. Yeah? And that's what it means. Yeah? Austria calls for war against Brazil. Yeah? Say it like this, Mrs. Köstinger. This is what it is. You don't want to buy the things of Mercosur? That's countries. That's people. That's daily people who are doing their farming, who are doing their production, and they want to sell their goods. And this young, beautiful lady, or the wonderful French president, it's all the same. Yeah? They go then and abuse their power that's vested in them by the political, by the population of Europe, who probably don't know exactly the context. Yeah? They say, more goods, very bad. Brazil, Mr. Jair Bolsonaro, the Amazonas, we have to save the Amazonas. Yes, sure. How will we save the Amazonas when we don't trade with them? The only thing they will have to do when we don't allow them to trade is to burn the whole of the Amazonas. And you, Mrs. Köstinger, Kurz, Rutte and Macron are responsible for such bad policy. It's really outrageous. So when it comes to the WTO, we obviously have to include more countries. Yeah? Since the accession of Afghanistan, it's remarkable, Afghanistan joined on the 29th of July 2016, we have not a single new country in the WTO. Obviously, we can all blame it on Trump. Or is everything Trump? Maybe. Yeah? I don't know the real reason why for years we have not been able to include Kosovo, Bosnia, Serbia. We have not included, and obviously now we see the result. Yeah? A total breakdown of Belarus and Azerbaijan. Yeah? And then we have not allowed Uzbekistan, a reform country since 2006. Yeah? Why Lebanon, Algeria, Ethiopia, Turkmenistan, Iraq, yeah? All are not, and all in crisis. Yeah? I mean, Ethiopia maybe less. Yeah? You know, maybe there are all specific reasons. Yeah? But tell me something. Is all of these countries really so much worse than Afghanistan? You know, Russia is in the WTO. It's the WTO is not the union of market democracies. It's common trade standards. Yeah, it's kind of reasonable standards to minimum level trading agreements. Yeah, you know, that's more technical organization. Obviously, it's a very important one, and it has a lot of powers, and it's really good. But you know, we have Afghanistan in. So tell me, cannot Azerbaijan be in? You know, now they have the war, but you know, Azerbaijan is a ERP partner country. Belarus as well. We have three potential candidate countries: Bosnia, Kosovo, and of course Serbia as a EU candidate country. I mean, and then they cannot be in the WTO. Or when you look for Algeria, that's already has a trade agreement with the EU. And Iraq, you know, please, why we have this freeze? I cannot understand it. That alone, these 11 countries, maybe without Belarus, would be more than 220 million people additionally benefiting from WTO. Here's the exact list. Yeah, we should have. I'm in favor of 11 countries. We should have this 11 at least in the next 2 years in. But there's a serious list. You know, what is the WTO doing? Yeah, that's of course, you know, also totally unserious, because see, Algeria, Andorra, Azerbaijan, Bahamas, Belarus. Now, at the moment, I wouldn't support that, yeah, because of the Lukashenko disaster. Bhutan, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Comoros, Curacao, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia. But Iran, I mean, Iran is a very hostile state, yeah. Why that? And then Kosovo is not allowed to be on that list. Who has made this decision? Iraq. Okay, that's good. Lebanon, Lebanese Republic, very good. Libya, yeah, it's in divided country in civil war. And then Serbia, yes, very good. Somalia, South Sudan, okay, it doesn't matter. It's good if it's possible, and there was a peace agreement. Sudan, very good, yeah. It's hopefully it will help the people there very much. Syrian Arab Republic on the list of WTO accession. Assad's terror regime on WTO? And Bosnia is not, and Kosovo is not. I mean, and Uzbekistan, Timor-Leste. So this has to be revised, you know. We have to have a serious hostile countries. We have already China and Russia inside, yeah. If the Iranians or the Syrians want to be in the WTO, please, you believe certain compliance and standards. At least don't barrel bomb your people, Mr. Assad, yeah? Or Iran, you know, massive executions, yeah? We still have to use this as leverage towards the real hostile and terror regimes. I don't think that free trade can be based on such terror which Assad and the Iranians do. So let's come back to the fundamentals. In principle, we have now 30 years of globalization, and we have to prepare the second 30 years of globalization. 30 years of global peace, yeah, amazing progress, yeah. And what I say amazing progress in the most important fundamental parameters is population increase from 5.3 to 7.8 billion population. It's an enormous increase of 2.5 billion more people. And we have also this amazing GDP output and the whole technology, you know, it was really fantastic, yeah. And it's good. Even that China is so much developing, it's very good for the world. We have 83 trillion of GDP, that's unprecedented prosperity, 65 trillion more. And include more into the WTO, develop OSCE and OECD, and reform the UN, and we can achieve even much more in the next 30 years, also include more countries and more people in our working structures. But the real responsibility comes here to the EU to start to be able to conclude the free trade agreements which are necessary for the next phase of globalization, because the EU must be the anchor of global stability, economic good governance globally, and political good governance. That's the task we have, and that we should be ready. But in order to achieve that, we have to be ready to make an apology for the past crimes we did to the world, because we did many and all countries were concerned. Obviously, some countries didn't exist in 1903 before, that's a different story. But, you know, that's why we need, as all Europeans, united by the institutions we have, yeah? That's the EU President of the Council, that's the Commission President, that's the Parliament. Make a joint apology to the world for past colonial crimes. That we can expect. And then the world will react and see Europe as a global anchor of stability in this crisis after Corona in the 2020s. Be open for the free trade agreements, conclude them, and we can have much better growth and prosperity, not just for us, but also for the Europeans. And that's, I think, is very much the task of the European leaders. And please make this apology, Mr. President. Thanks a lot.